Hello, this is the sixth story from A Book of Magic Animals by Ruth Manning-Sander. And this is an English story, and it's called The Small-Toothed Dog. Once upon a time there was a rich merchant whose business took him travelling into many distant cities. And one day, as he was riding homeward with his pockets stuffed with gold, he was set upon by thieves. The merchant defended himself as well as he could, but he was one and the thieves were many. They had already dragged him from his horse and had him lying on the ground, bleeding from many wounds, when a great, ugly, small-toothed dog came leaping from behind the hedge. Bristling, growling, snarling, biting, the dog set upon the thieves with such ferocity that they all fled. And then the dog, taking a firm grip on the merchant's coat, carried him along the road to a large house. And the merchant's horse followed along the road behind them. In that house, which is a rich and handsome one, the dog laid the merchant on a bed. And though there seemed to be no one but the dog in all that great house, some sort of people there must have been. For invisible hands dressed the merchant's wounds, and brought him food, and tended him until he was well enough to journey home. Then the merchant, overcome with gratitude, asked the dog what rewards he could offer him. "I have many curious and precious things at home," said the merchant, "and I would refuse you none of them. Will you accept a fish that can speak 12 languages?" "No," said the dog, "I will not." "Or a goose that lays golden eggs?" "No," said the dog, "I will not." "Then will you accept a mirror in which you can see what anyone is thinking?" "No," said the dog, "I will not." "Then what will you accept?" said the merchant. "For something I must and will give you." "Oh, all right," said the dog. "Go home. In a week I'll come and choose for myself a present that pleases me." Well, the merchant rode home, and a week later, sure enough, there was the great dog standing at the door. The merchant sent a manservant to open the door, but the dog wouldn't come in. The merchant sent a maidservant to the door, but no, the dog wouldn't come in. The merchant went himself to the door, but the dog just stood and stared. So at the last the merchant sent his young daughter to the door, and she was frightened, because the dog was so very large and so very ugly. But she spoke up politely and said, "If you please, my father would like you to come in and choose a present." And the great ugly dog wagged his tail and curled his lips into a smile, showing all his small teeth, and said, "You are the present I choose. Jump on my back, and I will take you home." Oh me, the girl didn't want to go, but somehow she had to. She got on the dog's back, and off he went at a great pace, mile after mile, until they reached the dog's house. Well, as you know, it was a large and handsome house, and the dog was kind. He gave the girl everything she could possibly need, and did his best to amuse her. So for a month she bore up. But after that first month she began to mope and cry. Said the dog, "What are you crying for?" Said the girl, "Oh, I want to go home and see my father." "Well," said the dog, "if you will promise not to stay home for more than 3 days, I will take you. But first of all, what do you call me?" "A great, ugly, small-toothed dog," said she. "Then," said he, "I will not let you go." And at that she began to cry more pitifully than ever, and she cried all day and all night. So next morning the dog said, "Very well, I will take you home. But before we start, tell me what you call me." "Oh," said she, I think your name must be sweet as a honeycomb. Jump on my back, said the dog, and he wagged his tail and curled his lips in a smile. And before getting over the stile, the dog made a pause and said, Now, what do you call me? Oh, said the girl, all joyous to think she was nearing home. What should I call you? But what you are, a great, ugly, small-toothed dog. The dog didn't say another word. He turned round and carried her back to his house. Well, she sobbed and she cried. She was sobbing and crying for a whole week. And the dog was growling and going round with his tail between his legs. It got so miserable in that house that at last the dog said, Perhaps I will take you home. But first, what do you call me? Sweet honeycomb, sobbed the girl. Jump on my back, said the dog. And she jumped on his back and off they went once more, she gripping hold of his rough coat and he running smoothly and easily for some 40 miles till they came to the stile. Now, what do you call me? Said the dog. Oh, says she, I call you sweet as a honeycomb. Then the dog gave a jump over the stile and they went on for more and more miles and came to a second stile. So, before getting over this second stile, the dog made a pause and said, Now what do you call me? A great, ugly, small-toothed dog, said she before she could stop herself. So the dog didn't jump over the stile. He turned around and carried her back to his house. My word, how the girl cried and how the dog growled. He left the girl to herself and she was crying all the time and going round all red-eyed and slobbery with tears. You look a sight, said the dog, and I shan't come near you. And he didn't go near her for days and days, until at last she ran to him and put her hands together as if she was praying and said very meekly, Please, dear dog, please, sweet as a honeycomb, please take me home. Up on my back, said the dog, and she got up on his back and they set off. Well, they came to the first stile and before jumping over it the dog said, Now, what do you call me? Sweet as a honeycomb, whispered the girl. So the dog got over the stile and ran on, mile after mile, and came to the second stile, and there he stopped and said, What do you call me now? A great... she began. Then she remembered. No. What should I call you? And what do I call you but sweet as a honeycomb? So the dog jumped over the stile, and on they went, and on they went. The girl was trying to please him now and was babbling out every sweet saying she could think of. Good dog and brave dog and kind dog. And the dog, proud and happy, was galloping along with his mouth open and his tongue dripping and his tail going wag, wag, wag from east to west and back from west to east. And so they came to her father's house, and the dog stopped in front of the door. Now, what do you call me? Says he to the girl. And the girl, all excited to think she would soon be rid of him and safe in her own home, began, A great big... Ugly, she was going to say, and the dog was turning round to take her back, but she caught hold of the door latch and clung to it. Then the dog gave her such a sad, sad look as cut her to her heart. And all at once she remembered how good and patient he had been with her, and she cried out, Sweeter than honeycomb, that's what I call you, sweeter than honeycomb, and good and kind and handsome. Well, she thought that now surely the dog would have been content, and galloped off and left her. But he did no such thing. He shook her off his back. He stood up on his hind legs with his two front feet. He pulled off his dog's head and tossed it high into the air. His rough, hairy coat dropped from him, and there he stood, the handsomest young prince in the world, and laughing at her. "Oh," she said. "Oh, you may well say, 'Oh,'" laughed he. "But if I have been a trouble to you, it's nothing to the trouble you've been to me. and I thinking all the time that I should have to remain under a spell for the rest of my life. But come, let us go in to your father, and if he says yes, will you say yes and marry me?" "Oh, yes," said the girl, and they both laughed. Then, hand in hand, they went into the house, and the prince told the merchant how a witch had turned him into a dog because he refused to marry her hag of a daughter. "And a great, ugly, small-toothed dog you shall remain," the witch had said, "until some maiden calls you handsome, and bah! You hideous creature, that will never be." "And now, merchant," said the prince, "you once told me that your house contained many treasures, and you offered me my choice of them. So of all the precious things you possess, I choose for myself the most precious, your daughter, to be my bride." "Oh, with all my heart," said the merchant. So the girl and the prince were married, and after the wedding the prince took his bride home to his grand house, where they were waited on now not by invisible hands, but by rejoicing servants, from whom also the spell had been lifted. And there they lived in happiness ever after.